Yeah, good morning, everyone, once again. And I would like to welcome you to this session 3, which is the parallel session. My name is Dr. Kiru Sichoongwe. I'm from the South African Research Chair in Industrial Development at the University of Johannesburg. This parallel session, it will look at sector strategies for industrial development under the African Continental Free Trade Area. And we have got 3 papers that are going to be presented under this particular section. And the presenters are Vuxaka Mashau, Canicio Dzingirai, Dr. Thakaramahlaha Lehohla. The last paper is a co-authored paper. And please, to the presenters, my pardon if I didn't and I don't pronounce your name as it's supposed to be pronounced. And then thereafter, we are going to have a Q&A session after all the presentations have been made. And each presentation will be able to run for about 10 to 15 minutes. And please, as presenters, let's stick to time. I'll be very strict on that one. So without further ado, we'll go directly to our first presenter, Vuxaka Mashau.
So Vuxaka will be able to take us on the paper titled South Africa's Spatial Industrial Areas and their role in driving industrial development and regional integration through the African Continental Free Trade Area. Over to you, Vuxaka. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and a very warm greeting to everybody. I had quite a shock when I came through to Gauteng. You know, it's so cold out here. Today I'll be presenting to you on the role of South African special industrial areas in driving industrial development and regional integration through the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So I'll just start off with just giving you a definition of what industrial areas are. Industrial areas are a mix of industrial parks, which can be state-owned or private, as well as special economic zones. They are demarcated areas which have private sector investment, as well as public sector investment, and they drive industrial activity. These are popular globally because they are major policy tools, especially in developing economies. So my research was trying to answer, establish whether South African special industrial areas are capable and conducive in establishing and strengthening autonomous value chains, and are they capable of driving industrial development and regional integration with the new opportunities that are before us. So I looked at a number of industrial areas which are state-owned, specifically 14 industrial parks and special economic zones in South Africa. Currently, we have a list of 15 prioritized state-owned industrial parks, which have been revitalized and refurbished through a dedicated fund, which is under the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, as well as about 12 special economic zones, which have been designated. But out of those, only a small proportion is where I actually undertook my research. We have seen in different literature that in South Africa, there's around 300 industrial areas. So this is a mix of private industrial areas as well as those that are public. But, you know, there are challenges that I'll further display in terms of where they are, what is happening, why aren't they not regulated, and why isn't there a specific number, but rather an approximate number. And the average land size per hectare in most of them is about 1,000. And my methodology was both qualitative and quantitative. I received data from different institutions, and I also carried out a few interviews. So when we look at occupancy rates, I found that about 70% of these precincts are occupied by businesses. So not all of them are fully let, and some have a long way to go in terms of businesses locating within them. So both state-owned industrial parks and special economic zones have been impactful. We've seen industrial parks sustaining 64,000 jobs in South Africa, and special economic zones creating 27,000 jobs. Furthermore, within special economic zones, we've seen over 200 investors being attracted and over 30 billion in investment being attracted. But however, challenges still persist in that they're not fully sustainable. They still rely on a constrained public fiscus for refurbishments, bulk infrastructure, top infrastructure, renewable energy project financing, as well as maintenance, which is has been a huge issue, especially for industrial parks. So the comparison between these different ex-slaves is that when we look at the average lifespan, not really lifespan, but how old most of them are, we've seen that industrial parks in South Africa have an average age of 35 years, and special economic zones are at about 15 years on average, although there are older special economic zones which were designated in the early 2000s. And the projections are that by 2035, there will be 40 industrial parks which will be prioritized by the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition as part of their refurbishment project, and also in bringing more or constructing more industrial parks that would be greenfield. This is because they are key in revitalizing the rural and township economies. And also when it comes to special economic zones, around 20 are projected to have been designated. This is for further regional development. Currently, there are those that are under construction and being developed throughout I think almost all South African provinces, although some have advanced more than others. The dominant sectors in the industrial parks and special economic zones have been around service offerings within the industrial parks. And this would mainly construction and maintenance work and calibration services. We've seen the clothing and textiles sector as well. This one goes back to even the 70s and 80s. In provinces such as the Free State and KwaZulu-Natal, where these sectors were flourishing and even creating employment outside of South Africa, as well as agro-processing. The same goes for special economic zones. The automotive sector is gaining a lot of momentum. There's a lot of FDI there, which is coming through, whereas different businesses try to strengthen their value chains. They've actually attracted businesses who are manufacturing different components to actually come and locate in South Africa and start businesses within the country, and also other general manufacturing and services. Within services, especially for SEZs, we've seen data centers and business process services booming. There's a great amount of interest also within that sector. So when we look at the average company ownership, because a core mandate of the industrial parks and especially the SEZs is to attract foreign direct investment as well as domestic investment, as well as technology. We've seen that around 80% of businesses are actually domestic direct investment businesses, which is quite significant. And 15% is FDI, and there are also joint venture businesses with a proportion of 5% in company ownerships. So this one is very important because there's always talk of how FDI should be attracted within the different regions and within South Africa, but it still needs to grow. It poses a lot of opportunities because FDI businesses already have satellite businesses all around the world and within Africa. So if we look at how Africa can trade or intercontinental trade for Africa, it would also be good to see a bigger proportion of FDI in that manner, and also in terms of their reserves, internal reserves, and access to funding. They are bigger businesses, and they are able to produce for greater markets. So it has been difficult to actually track the actual percentage of trade between industrial parks and SEZs because some companies do not want to be transparent and share the data. But also there's a lot of SMMEs who are manufacturing components which go into bigger value chains and so forth, and to different end users. So it has been difficult for them to actually know whether they export or not. But there is export activity currently at an average of 25%, especially in SEZs, which is quite low, and there's scope for that to grow. We've seen a significant portion of exports going to the SADC, and as well as other countries in Africa and to the rest of the world. So there are quite some advantages and disadvantages for businesses locating in industrial areas. The advantages for industrial parks are, such as low rental rates, access to labor, and making a difference in the rural and township economies. And then for special economic zones is the customs controlled area adherence, that's security, preferential incentives, and so forth. But there are other persistent challenges, such as inconsistent maintenance in industrial parks, vandalism, high rental rates in special economic zones, as well as a very important one, the sunset clause on SEZ incentives, for now, which will be in January 2031, where businesses are no longer sure whether they will have these benefits and incentives beyond that time period, making it very difficult to locate within special economic zones. And there are low levels of localization, which makes businesses susceptible to external shocks because of that low resilience. And this is one challenge which, goes beyond South Africa as a whole. I mean, when we look at opportunities in trading within the African Continental Free Trade Area. So our recommendation is that there should be greater solutions in terms of access to funding, especially for smaller businesses, so that they are able to produce for bigger markets. So there is potential, but then the ability for mass production doesn't seem to be there. So there can be opportunities for accessing more markets, but funding solutions will actually help accelerate production and access to more markets. The other one is competition with the rest of Africa. And we need to harness digital tools and also focus on our energy mix so that we use ESG as value proposition and strengthen stakeholder collaboration. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Vuxaka, for that wonderful and insightful presentation indeed. So at this juncture, I'll go to the next speaker, Canicio Dzingirai. Could you please come to the front and make your presentation? Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm presenting on economic partnership agreements and trade flows and growth using a select of SADC countries. I think we are just call them select SADC countries, but they are SACU plus Mozambique. I think this was part of the European Union on the Conoto agreement, where they start to look at how can they partner with Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific. But the problem is that Africa, the argument is that Africa now, it's like many countries now advanced, they want to use what we call divide and conquer. That's why they come to try to make agreements with individual countries instead of now we have the African Continental Free Trade Area. We are saying, is it not the best possible way now, if you want to negotiate with the bigger countries, which is like a trading bloc, like the EU, is it not best for us to do it at the African Continental Free Trade Area than doing it in silos? Just is picking one few countries. Like now in this agreement, which have been done, there are only 6 countries in SADC, of which other countries are not part of it. So it means like we are looking at a battle like it's an elephant and small animal that are trying to fight. That means at the end, the results are already known. So we are saying if we negotiate as a bloc, as a continent, I think our voice, our negotiating power is going to be higher. Then this debate is coming from a lot of literature. Now we've agreed that trade drives growth. And they also agree that, but the problem is we're talking about EPA. Traditionally, we're talking about PTA, which were the preferential trade agreements, which were less flexible because they only look at lessening some tariffs. But on the EPA ones, the best is that they now try to completely remove them. But the problem is Africa able to have that competitive advantage so that it can compete with a regional bloc with a monetary union in place? Africa does not have a monetary union. We know that monetary agreement is like trade enabler. So given that Africa now, we are focusing more on the trade side, why are we leaving out the monetary agreement aspect outside? Except I think there are about 3 regional blocks right now, which have got a common monetary area, the Southern Africa one, the West Africa one, and the Central Africa one. But they are working again in silos. Why can't we come up with the United States of Africa? Why can't we come up with industrialization and manufacturing hubs to say, okay, for agricultural good like cocoa, let's put an industrial hub in West Africa. For diamonds and other one, we put an industrial hub somewhere so that we do that competitive advantage. Because already we've got a competitive advantage on our primaries rather than trading them in the raw state. So the main argument is where we are now looking at what are the main issue? Is the EPA trade agreement a good way for Africa, or it is a bad solution? But still now we have somewhere to start from, but we are taking lessons from that. But the main problem that you are still continuing to do what is known as spaghetti bowl. I think for now we have African Union have got about 8 regional blocks, of which many countries are in that network. So we are calling it spaghetti bowl. So that spaghetti bowl is giving Africa a challenge. It was instead of commitment. A country might be in 3 or 4 regional blocks. How can, some agreements are different, how can they commit? These agreements are in conflict. They are not in compatible. So we are saying, why can't we come up with one continental free trade agreement where all the policies and agreements of other regional blocks, they are aligned also in the terms of, again, the World Trade Organization, so that we align all our policies, so that we align them at a continental level. Then I think the main issue that for what is happening now, Africa, inter-African trade is the least amongst all other regional blocks. If you look at North American Free Trade Area, 54, Africa is at 15, Asia is at 54, European Union is 70. These are inter-regional trade, but Africa have got the least one, which is 15%. That means African countries are trading silos individually with advanced countries, of which they cannot win that battle. That's why you see we have all the resources. Why can't we beneficiate them? Why can't we value add them so that we benefit? But the beauty of it is that for that 15% where inter-African trade is occurring, the highest part of it is on manufactured goods. You can see 36% is what is happening between inter-African trade, which means they are trading more on the manufactured goods against the world than what they are trading in terms of their raw unprocessed goods, which trade with other countries, which you call it inter-trade. They trade about 24%. So we are saying if Africa try to value add, industrialize, and then it means they can benefit more because the market is already there. What we need is just to work at other higher sectors like the tertiary sector in the manufacturing sector. Now we are still in the primary sector of production. We are still working on the unprocessed goods. Then if we look at what are the effects, if we look at some of the indicators, if we look at some trade agreement, look at within the African countries, only South Africa is having a net current account surplus. All other countries, they are in the deficit. So which means within the SARCI, I just use the SARCI one because the EPA is normally looking at SARCI plus Mozambique so that they become 6. So we are looking at South Africa is the major beneficiary in this agreement. So what happened to the other ones? That means if you can come up with industrial hubs, in manufacturing hubs, we can now cross-pollinate in these countries and also have beneficial agreements between them. Then now we look at the ratio. If you look at inter-SARCI trade, I'm just using SARCI because already that's, we are only excluding Mozambique. If you look at the EPA, the EU SADC agreement, they only include SARCI countries plus Mozambique. So if you look at that scenario, you can see that Africa is having the least inter-trade, and they are doing a lot of intra-trade. That means now, if you are looking at EPA agreement, it cannot yield the results except if we look inward instead of looking outward. So that's why we are saying, let's try to streamline, let's try to realign all the regional trading agreements so that they align at the continental level, so that they no longer that conflict from the spaghetti bowl. So now we are looking at, why are we normally looking at the EU SADC EPA agreement? The issue is that normally these African countries, normally their trade, their growth is really going down. And also most of them, they are in deficit. South Africa only incurred, since after they have an agreement, the European Union individually, other than the regional, they only incurred a surplus only in 2023, of which South Africa is the major country, especially in Africa. So now we are looking at how can the EPA agreement try to moderate the effect of trade flows on growth, and how does EPA also affect individually trade and also individually on growth. And the main issue that comes up is that when we are looking at the EU SADC agreement, the main argument is that these agreements are too rigid. That means they are giving problem of malnourishment, especially in Africa, but there's food deficiency, because these countries are making sure that they abide to the agreements. So they make sure that no matter in Africa there's no enough food, they still have to meet their obligation as per the agreement. Which means now that's why you find that in Africa, most countries who can produce enough, they are selling it out, but they are going to import again at higher costs. So that there's now food security danger, especially with these international trade agreements. Now we use this economic model. I'm not going too much into the economic model. We use the more advanced one, which is the two-way exponential fixed effects model to try to achieve the main issue of the objectives. The symbol of these countries, we look at the 6 African countries plus 27 EU countries. That's where we get bilateral trade. We are using the concept of the gravity model, but the gravity model was proved to be inferior to the two-way fixed effects model. Then we go to the results. The results, when they come out, these were the very interesting issues that come out, is that we find that GDP of importing and exporting countries, they've got an effect on growth and also trade. But of much interest is the highest inelastic effect, especially on distance, because distance was found to be the largest negative effect. So distance was working as a drag so that Africa cannot harvest enough benefits from the EU-Africa agreement because of distance. So from that argument, you can simply say that to circumvent this problem, Africa must do work with inter-trade as opposed to intra, so that they can benefit from that, because distance is making sure that there's a drag on the benefits that Africa can gain. if we look at the results, the one that we look there, if you look at individual effects of EPA on trade, we find that it was about 0.28, and also on growth, it was about 0.375. But if you look at interaction between trade agreements and trade, their impact on growth, you can find that it is 0.82, which is the largest effect. So we are saying that trade agreements, they give some beneficial than individual effects on trade or growth. But the issue is that the major hindrance there is distance, because distance has the largest negative effect on those benefits. That's why we are saying Africa must trade between themselves so that they try to avoid the challenge that is coming from distance. Then on the conclusion, we find that evidence shows that EPA have a positive effect on both bilateral trade and growth. Then also find that the effect is higher if we combined trade and the agreements on growth. But the major drag, or the one that normally regress the benefits, is the distance. And also find that most countries were colonized, that colonization legacy. That means it have got higher effect, and also language links. That's why you find that EU countries, they normally prefer trade with those countries which they traditionally colonized, or which they speak the same language with. Then what is the policy suggestion for this one? For the policy suggestion, we are saying African countries should increase export value addition so that they can move away from primary export reliance. Then again, Africa must boost on intra-African trade so that they try to avoid those, I think you've seen that they were current account deficits. So to avoid that vulnerability, they have to do trade within themselves. The beauty is that they are trading more on manufactured goods. So if they can deepen it, the better. Another issue is that we are looking at non-tariff barriers is a major problem. We look at Africa have got problem of hard and soft infrastructure. Hard infrastructure, talk about the system that they normally use. Soft infrastructure, we are talking about human capital. Some countries in Africa have got excess human capital, which is specialized, which is exported to Europe. Instead of other countries in Africa, they have a deficit on human capital. Why can't those countries try to cross-pollinate each other so that they have got higher benefits? Another policy implication from this is that Africa, especially the continental free trade area, they must move to a higher level, because according to movements, we are still at the beginning of the free trade agreements. We must move to the common currency, common monetary unions above, so that they also give the same emphasis. Because now African countries are trading with European countries who have got a euro. African countries, they've got their fragmented currencies. So the better that they come up with their own United States of Africa currency, where it is backed by their resources. So that can be stronger if they work together, so that they don't work in silos. Then another issue is that non-tariff barriers must be eliminated, because especially border and free movement of goods is really a larger hindrance on African trade. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Canicio, for your presentation on economic partnership agreement, trade flows and growth evidence from selected 30 countries. So we'll go to our last presenter, of course not the least, Dr. Thakaramahlaha. He's going to take us on the topic clustering and strategic industrial financing development partnership projects and operations approach, both inclusive growth and sustainable industrialization.
Oh, thank you. Clustering and strategic industrial financing development projects, operations towards inclusive growth and sustainable industrialization. Well, considering that we have the Africa Free Trade Agreement that is looking at a creation of regional value chains as a way of addressing the poverty and also manufacturing-driven economy, where generation of up to 560 billion and manufacturing has been seen as a core sector that would be leading this. We have done research on clustering and strategic partnership, which is a model that does indeed support your industrial and regional value chains. And it's a collective model that has all stakeholders, such as your DFI, your government, Department of Trade and Industry, SMMEs, and large corporates. So it is an inclusive model, which makes me reflect at my time at the Department of Trade and Industry when we were working on the cluster development model as well as the strategic partnership. Well, I've highlighted the introduction already. I can move over to the next slide. In terms of a brief on what the cluster development model does. The problem statement, despite a population of 1.3 billion, GDP of 3.4 trillion, and abundant mineral resource, the continent lacks effective progressive strategy on industrial cluster development and strategic partnership program. Such an initiative is essential considering the 560 billion increase, manufacturing being the largest contributor, driving 30 million people out of poverty and 450 million income boost to enhance continental exports, increased by 81% within Africa and 19 to non-African countries. This is a AfCFTA strategy. So despite the abundance in minerals that we have in the continent, we're still suffering from the GDP per capita to below 1,000 USDs. So regional value chains, their purpose is looking at the unbundling of manufacturing and production lines beyond the borders, more focused on competitive advantage. So to highlight on the current status of AfCFTA as well as the continent and what is being envisaged, you see we're looking at 1.3 billion and 3.4 trillion USD in the continent. And then by 2035, we are looking at the population of potentially lifted out of poverty by 30 million people, 30 million people, and 450 billion income boost. And on the other hand, I'm going to come at a later stage on this, where the continent that is very rich in mineral resources, actually leading in some of these minerals, but however, we see the vice in terms of our trade participation globally, which was 2018 at about 2.6 and 2019 at about 1.6, somewhere around there. Mainly because, as some of the speakers highlighted earlier, it was as a result of us not processing tertiary products manufactured more on primary agricultural products. And so indeed, for us to focus on our manufacturing capacity and industrialization policies, more focused on. So also, as you can look at, if you have a look at the presentation here in terms of the continent's GDP, there's inequality in terms of the spread, whereby half is in 5 of the countries and the other half the rest of Africa. So it is important to see how there is a spread which is equitable, more or less, and that comes to our establishment of regional value chains in order to achieve the objective by AfCFTA. And we're also looking at the other presentation, that side looks at our amount of arable land. It's about 60%, the population, the national resource reserves, etc. And looking at the current positioning of the continent and what is being envisaged and how do we ensure that from policies and others, we ensure that we are able to create this future that we envisage. Well, the key challenge in the continent, as you can see from this presentation, tabular representations.
You see that in terms of our intergroup and the rest of the world, in terms of import and exports, our performance still shows that in terms of our in trading internally within the continent, our performance is not exactly to scratch versus how we trade with the rest of the world. Hence, our advancing to the regional value chains where we unbundle the manufacturing beyond orders based on your competitive advantage. In terms of SADC, you can see the SADC intergroup and I think the East Africa, that's where we see a slightly better performance. But as for the other groups in the other regional groups, the performance is really appalling, and it's not like they're very rich in mineral resource and the likes, but however, it must be at a very primary level, as we have it has been highlighted. The tertiary produce that is demanded is not exactly, the focal area is not and as I indicated, if you look at the graphical representation in terms of exports, within the continent was 60%, and the imports within 12%. And revenue contributed for globally at about 1.7%. This was in 2019. And if you look at the other trends globally, certainly Africa is, and this is even more, this is a greater picture that shows indeed that within intertrade we're at 15%, and then with the rest of the world 70%, and with Asia 60%. So it does indeed call for the need for the creation of the regional value chains and unbundling of the manufacturing beyond the borders. And development of industrial policies such as your IPAP and the likes, ensuring that incentive programs such as cluster and strategic partnership are at the forefront, because they look at the entire stakeholder from your government, your TLFIs, and the SMMEs in the supply value chain. And if you look at this graphical representation, it shows that we've only accounted for 2.6% of global trade in 2018. The second last line over there reflects the graphical representation is a reflection of how Africa has been performing in terms of global trade, in terms of exports and imports. That is where it is. It's still a signal for African countries to intensify industrial policies and plans focusing on advancement from primary to tertiary industrial economies, embracing shift from export to finished value-added products. Well, a sign of hope in addressing this is that the continent has held a total of 1.4 trillion investable wealth, and there's been signs of new wealth hubs emerging in the African continent. So it's a matter of how policy does communicate in this, interpret the plans industrialization and policies and incentives that do indeed encourage a climate conducive for FDI and also domestic direct investment. Hence, your strategic partnership and your cluster development program, how use to the model on cluster development and strategic partnership in depth as to how it would. So, as you can see here, this is a model, that I've been highlighting on. For 4 minutes, for very little time. So, it is a model that encompasses your private sector, your government, your FDI, and based on 80-20 ratio for cluster development and a 50-50 for strategic partnership model, and it looks at creating new industries, revitalizing industrial parks, critical infrastructure, And part of the amount is coming from the government with the focus of looking at the developmental state in your private sector, you looking at enhancing the scorecard, the enterprise supply development. So this is a model that we also look at operations for the economic benefits realization. So this is more studying on how it works. And let me just go to and your master question on manufacturing as to the importance why our industry partners, more especially the industrialists, should be focusing on competitive excellence and joint improvement tools. They shouldn't just manufacture. They should be assisting thinking in terms of how they operate in order to be competitive. You were able to do benchmarking, the engineering, and doing just in time, and we're having the whole partnership approach. So that in terms of the products that they have that are developed, they have a competitive position, they can have higher prices, increase market share, and defect free so that you can have returns. And they're already made for the market, and there's a high confidence in in our produce. And then we're able to increase profits, and hence it was able to impact on the country's balance of payments. That is the role that we should focus on. For the methodology that I applied was empirical studies and secondary data, focusing on strategic partnerships, regional value chains, project management, and integral to cluster and strategic partnerships. So first, let me jump to the conclusion. So to fully capitalize on population of 1.2 billion and 2.3 trillion, Africa must develop industrial policies strengthening Africa's framework and fostering regional value chains. The AfCFTA project is 90% of tariffs, enhancing free trade, regional integration, increase regional income by 450 million. If 30 million people out of extreme poverty, boosting to export 81%. To realize these gains, industrial policies should prioritize integrated cluster strategic partnership models, engaging government, plus corporations, development finance institutions, and SMMEs. And the focus should be on the capital in terms of investment, enterprise level competitiveness, green technology, feasibilities, and revitalization of industrial parks. I've exhausted my time. I think a little bit respect. But so more, also furthermore, we should ensure that our infrastructure is adequately conducive, such as our rail, our telecommunications, and ports, in order as an enabler, investment into the identified areas. So yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Thakaramahlaha, for that wonderful presentation. So let me just take your seat. So at this juncture, I'm going to go directly to the Q&A session. Can I just see those who would like to ask a question, and then I'll be able to recognize your hand. I can see one hand by the back there, followed by the second hand there, and then the third one here. Yeah, so far 3 hands. Yeah. Okay, I've seen the other 2. We'll come to you later. You can go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah, just identify yourself, your name, and where you're coming from. Thank you.
My name is Isa. I have a question, 2 questions actually.
Try to be brief to accommodate the other questions. Thank you.
Yes, please. What are we willing to do to assist farmers to comply with EU regulations in terms of exporting agricultural crops and livestock or meat produce? My second one goes to Dr. Lehohla. Also, in relation to skills development, what are we doing to assist farmers to add more value to their produce so that we can have better returns on their goods? Thank you.
Thank you. There's a hand here, someone here. Yeah, just there in the red word. Yeah, the red attire over there. Yeah, just pass on the mic.
Okay, thank you. My question goes to my name first. My name is Miracle Okoro. I'm an associate at CLG, Lawyers and Business Advisors. My question goes to the second speaker. Apologies, I don't want to murder your name. But the speaker who spoke about economic partnership agreements. So some of my thoughts that I just want you to speak to. The AfCFTA contemplates that, excuse me, the AfCFTA contemplates that state parties may not be at the same level of development. Hence, one of the governing principles of that agreement is the principle of flexibility and variable geometry. And so we also know that the regs under the AfCFTA are the building blocks for that agreement. How can we reconcile, the principle of flexibility and variable geometry and the fact that regs are building blocks with some of your thoughts around negotiating in silos? So you talked about how we're negotiating in silos and we're negotiating as regions instead of negotiating at a continental level. Instead of negotiating at a continental level. So if some states feel like they've moved forward and then they want to negotiate with the EU, for instance, how can we balance what the AfCFTA is trying to achieve with the developmental speed of other countries and other regions that want to move ahead? Thank you.
Thank you. The next person, someone here. Let's try to go through now our questions. It's a Q&A session, question and answer session. Yeah.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Tabisile Similane from the Gauteng Department of Economic Development. So my question is to just all the speakers. We are speaking of an inclusive and sustainable industrialization, but I'm not saying any pointers to how MSMEs are going to be part of that inclusive and sustainable industrialization. You spoke of SEZs that there's a lot of high rental rates. And just looking at it, they also don't have access to markets, and they're also facing infrastructural problems and electricity and water bills. So how are we going to assist them to be able to compete and play a role in the inclusive and sustainable industrialization that we're trying to come up with? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Latapo Satole, and I'm with SARChI-ID. My question is twofold and is directed at Vuxaka. Are South African SEZs being positioned to foster cross-border value chains, particularly in priority sectors for the AfCFTA, like automotive, agro-processing, and pharmaceutical? And also, has the AfCFTA shifted the road which South Africa promotes its SEZs to international investors and anchor tenants? Are we seeing new value propositions being put across because of the AfCFTA and the markets that they will be able to access? Thank you.
Welcome. The last one here. Yeah.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Posha Mzizi. I'm from the University of Witwatersrand. I wanted to ask a question on the third speaker. You spoke on competitive advantage, that we should actually, our firms should actually operate on competitive advantage. But don't you think it's kind of problematic to focus on competitive advantage to some extent? Because more specifically on our infant industries, right? How do we then protect our infant industries? We'll usually speak on import substitution policies, right? On, we're protecting our industries, but it will also affect us. How would you then suggest us to go about this competitive advantage while protecting our infant industries and also protecting us as a nation from getting affected by import substitution policies? If you have any recommendations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll come to probably better to come to the other set of questions. Let me just get one question online. It's not directed to anyone, just to all of you. It says, what can be done to make industrial tax effective and key sources of exports? So I think I'll give the panelists the opportunity to be able to respond to the concern that have been raised. Let me start with Canicio and then Dr. Leko and then Vuxaka also in that particular order, just in about 3 to 4 minutes or so. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think there was a question which was directed to me about what can be done. What can be done about African free trade area instead of African countries are negotiating in silos, and then the main idea is that already there are protocols that are in place, and I think some countries were choosing to ratify some and they leave some. The least ratified one was the free movement of I think free movement of human capital across countries. Why you can see that already we can find that, especially when we are coming up with a negotiation to come out with those protocols, most of them are done by foreign consultants. Very few African consultants were involved. Some people who are doing consultants, especially for the AU, for some of the protocols, they don't have any knowledge about Africa. African consultants are there. They have the knowledge with many expertise in Africa. Some of them are in the World Trade Organizations, but they are not included in coming up with homegrown policies. We are supposed to come up with what we call Afrocentric policies instead of just take Eurocentric policies. I think we'll see what happened to ASAP. It was a complete disaster for Africa because we just borrow some policies wholesomely from outside the country through those consultants who are giving us those policies. They don't have any knowledge about Africa. We have our own indigenous knowledge. For example, there was an issue about some of the protocols that were coming up with. Some critical groups and individuals were omitted. When we talk about SMEs, we know that in Africa, most SMEs are the ones who are involved in manufacturing. And also, due to unemployment in Africa, they are the ones who are doing the activity, but they were not included in coming out with those policies that are also, so that they are also going to be inclusive in part and parcel of the policy. So we must look at the inclusivity of policies. Then again, women, I think women were talking about gender equality and other things. Then we talk about African Continental Free Trade Area. We are the policies that are meant for the women. That's another issue. Again, youth, we are looking at 3 million youth are getting into the job market everywhere in Africa. How are they captured in the African Continental Free Trade Area? Given that now you are moving towards AI, they are more technical savvy. We are still putting leaders who are not well versed with the technology that we are moving at. So why can we include the youth who are technical savvy so that they become part and parcel, they become the drivers of the policies that we are coming up with? Then I think those are some of the critical issues. Again, the critical aspect about advocacy. I think in Africa Continental Free Trade Area, voices of advocates, they are not there. CSOs were supposed to be part and parcel so that they push, because we know that for government ministers to go out of their comfort zone, they have been pushed through advocacy. So where are the CSOs who are supposed to be funded so that they push that agenda narrative? And again, some NGOs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My question will respond. My response will be to the 3 questions. I think there's one via teams on industrial parks, and there's one on the competitive advantage, and there was another one from the lady there from the Gauteng Economic Department. I don't know if I exactly got the question, but I think it was around SMMEs and it's just that it slightly slipped out of my mind, but I think I have an idea. Maybe if you can just articulate again so I can be exact in terms of how I respond. Enjoy.
A role that MSMEs can play to ensure an inclusive and sustainable industrialization.
Okay. So the question by the teams was on industrial parks. From my experience at the DTI, I still maintain the cluster development model and strategic partnership if applied and focused on as a driver, it would be able to address the problem holistically because it's multiple stakeholders involved in the economy. From your government, your large corporates, your SMMEs, your tertiary institutions. It's a very blended model that accommodates all parties. And if you look at the cost sharing grant that the DTI was based on an 80-20 model, based on a 10 million grant, whereby DTI would come with 80% and SMME with a cluster, which was under industry association, comes with a 20%. But depending on how you pay it, but I think it is an ideal model and there's an upfront payment of 2.5 million. And cluster can either be a sector-based cluster, geographical cluster, and capital investment, your machinery and equipment, your product improvement, process improvement, and skills development and training, and all of that are there as a matter of ensuring that the clusters are competitive. So the purpose of clustering is to ensure that there is a economies of scale, a synergy. In my personal capacity as a company, I would not be able to acquire this machinery and equipment that would enable me to compete with maybe your Chinese who are so advanced in terms of producing this product. But collectively we can be able to. And also, is looking beyond also even getting into new markets as well, and having shared infrastructure, product improvement, process improvement. All the needs of an industrialist are addressed, but it's for all of you collectively, whether geographic. And then for the competitive advantage, you realize that with the geographical, maybe you want to use 5S, Lean Six Sigma, and so forth to ensure that you apply your improvement and competitiveness in terms of the way you do things. So the cluster model is very inclusive. And when coming to strategic partnership, it's where large corporates, as part of the code of good practice, they contribute towards enterprise supply development, focusing on manufacturing and enhancing manufacturing related services. So the challenge was those entities which are those sectors which are capital intensive, which may feel that it may not be worth their while. But I had during my time there was MassMart. But unfortunately, it was during COVID. It did about 5 SMMEs or 8 SMMEs, even if not more. And it was prepared to come on this program. And we're talking about SMMEs that were in detergents, furniture, textiles, the list goes on. So it's a matter of how we look at it. This inclusive industrialization that is very blended across your TFI, your tertiary institutions, your SMMEs. And we also see the need to improve the state of our manufacturing, whereby we are down 12% from where we were in the 90s as a result of other factors. Like, for instance, SARChI, coming to regional value chain, SARChI, the one company in Mozambique, where as a result of this power.
Sorry, Doc, for the interject. Maybe you can just quickly wind up.
Okay, I think I don't know if I've responded to everyone adequately. So my place forever never stop. Have I responded adequately?
Okay, thank you. Outside. Yeah, okay, in the lunch break. Yeah, thank you so much. We can go to Vuxaka now.
Thank you very much. I'll start with the question on inclusivity and how SMMEs are included just to ensure their success. I think one model that is lagging behind in most places in South Africa is innovation hubs and skills hubs. Because even if we have people owning businesses and businesses which are operational and running, we still need the innovation aspect just to be agile and adaptable to changes in the environment. So when you look at SMMEs in how they start to commercialize and as they operate, they still need to be integrated into innovation hubs and into skills training, because there's so many skills that are lacking. And that is a core foundational requirement. We've seen it in the industrial parks, even within the SCZs, how finances are handled, how opportunities are handled, when it comes to businesses that involves cross-border transactions. So that is one key area that is required. Another key area is access to funding, the incentives and the subsidies, most of which are quite exclusionary. If you look at what is currently being offered, the thresholds for profits that are required for accessing incentives and subsidies. So that those guidelines and policies also need to be revised. And also, if you look at the size of many SMMEs, actually they're much smaller, compared to other businesses within the industrial parks and SCZs, and actually smaller facilities that cater for SMME operations would really work. Because if you look at the rental rates and so forth, they're determined by square meterage or hectareage, and so forth. And sometimes SMMEs could actually share facilities or have those dedicated facilities. So another important one is integration into value chains, just having information on who is doing what and where are they positioned, and actually bringing in those clusters. Because if you look, for example, at the clothing and textiles industry, there should be a cotton grower, a hemp grower, there is non-wovens which are required, and then the materials will be produced, but then also further down, there are those who mix and manufacture dyes for the different materials so that we have the different colors and so forth. So also, roping SMMEs into those different value chains is required, because right now we do have dialogue, we do have policies around how to reindustrialize the different sectors and so forth, but there isn't much information on who is where and how those different businesses could be integrated. And then, so the other question was, what can be done to make industrial parks more successful? I think, there's a great amount of dilapidation. If you look at the state-owned industrial parks, there are other industrial parks which are privately owned and those that are new and coming up. But the ones that were actually established in the 70s and 80s are not well maintained. And one problem also goes back to rental and fiscus funding, which is limited. The businesses struggling to pay rent. And then there's also a huge burden on the fiscus from the part of national government. And but maintenance is a requirement. Also security, which can be improved, because I think the rates that are charged there are actually much lower than private parks and SCZs. But there's just a significant level of being tentative from business because of how they are run. So governance and access to funding would really make a huge difference. And then the other question was, is there any new value proposition around SCZs, especially with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement? Yes, there is. I think a lot of the plans and how SCZs or the requirements or expectations out of SCZs are going to be changing already are. I think there's work that is being done to a point where even when you look at localization, there's proposals that when inputs are actually produced from Africa, then that should be an advantage, something that is seen as an additional benefit. And this is a way of incentivizing businesses locating in SCZs to localize even further and within Africa. So there is that encouragement for intercontinental trade and grasping those opportunities.
Yeah, thank you so much, the presenters, for that wonderful insight indeed, and for the capacity and willingness to be able to take on the Q&A session. Yeah, one of the most important things actually that is coming out from this section is that it's possible for our region as well as our continent to be able to industrialize and be able to create the much needed jobs that we need on the continent, and possibly be able also to fight the prevailing levels of poverty in most African countries. So there's a willingness and also a determination, and the solutions are also with us here. So could you please help me to thank the presenters by appreciating them with a round of applause once again. Yeah, so we can still continue these discussions outside. The presenters are easily approachable. We can discuss the things that you felt that you needed to bring to the attention of the presenters. And at this juncture, we are going to break up for lunch, and then we'll be able to meet in the afternoon again. I can only wish you all a very happy lunch. Thank you so much.